answer to the question, what advice would you give young marketers who are now entering this space? And the answer is always curiosity, which is something that one could say it's a simple thing, but all of them, they say to be a great marketer, the one skill that you should possess is the ability just to be curious about not only the brands or the companies or the industry you're working in, but just holistically as a human being. You need to be asking why.
Welcome to today's episode of Beyond the Billboard. We are the first and only out-of-home podcast in South Africa. We've noticed on YouTube that 65% of the audience enjoying our content is not subscribed. If you're listening to this and you're not subscribed, please take a moment to do so. It really helps to support us and the platform. Today we welcome Pat Mahlangu to the podcast. Pat is the founder of Pat on Brands and the founder and CEO of Lerato Agency. Pat, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, and greetings to your viewers and listeners.
It is so exciting for us to have you join us today because this is the first time we've had a fellow podcaster join us on the podcast. So we are so excited to chat to you today around marketing, media, out of home. You have interviewed some of the biggest brands in the country. You have got a wealth of knowledge and exposure to the media industry. You have sat down with some of the biggest CEOs and CMOs in the country, discussed how media and marketing is playing out on those brands. And we really would just love to get into that conversation with you today. You're involved in various marketing and media initiatives across various different platforms. Recently, you hosted your Business to Brand Summit, which took place over a few days in Johannesburg, as well as launching the Top 16 SA Youth-Owned Brand Awards, which is a fantastic initiative that celebrates brands that are owned by the youth market in South Africa. So we would love to discuss some of these initiatives with you, as well as get an idea of why did you found Pat on Brands? What is it all about? And why did you decide to create this podcast and media platform?
Yeah. So Pat on Brands, actually, believe it or not, it's turning 10 years this year. So I started it back in 2016 when I was still at university, doing the first year of my master's. And it was purely out of my passion for brands and marketing. And the name actually was inspired by the legendary Jeremy Maggs. Remember when he still had Maggs on Media?
Yes.
Yeah. So I used to religiously, watch Maggs on Media. And yeah, somehow got inspired. And I thought maybe the most efficient way to start is through a blog, when blogging was still a thing. So I asked one of my mates to help me set up a website or a blog site and someone to design my logo. And off I started, just sharing my thinking about the world of marketing and brands. And fast forward, the platform has obviously evolved, from just being a blog to now, obviously, we have multiple touch points. We've got our own events properties. We've got our own podcast. And yeah, we just continue, to try out different, I'd say, forms of media and for us to reach more audiences.
Thank you for sharing that and sharing your background as to how you have come to where you are today. I wanted to ask, and I'm asking you this because I thought about it when I was going into this episode and I was doing some prep and I was thinking, being podcast hosts and then being a guest on an episode, what would I like to be asked? And then I thought about it and I thought, I'd maybe like to be asked this question. So I'm going to ask you this question.
Okay.
You have interviewed and heard from some incredible minds in the marketing fraternity and in the marketing and advertising industry. Incredible brands like Telkom, Microsoft, Nedbank, and many, many more over the years. What is have you had one of those moments where they've shared some guest of yours has shared like a really amazing insight or, perspectives, one of those aha moments?
Sure.
Was there a moment for that for you with a guest, one of your guests, and what was it and why, perhaps? Why did you have that moment?
Sure. I mean, many interesting things get said on during the podcast and during the conversations, and I think it'll be difficult for me to pinpoint, that one thing on that one particular guest because each guest, brings in a different and a unique perspective
Mm.
on the topic of discussion. But also, I think perhaps just to flip your question a bit, what is the one thing that because one of the questions I asked them because understanding that my audience is mainly young professionals that also trying to figure out things in the industry. And
Mhm.
the answer to the question, what advice would you give young marketers who are now
Yeah.
entering this space? And the answer is always curiosity, which is something that one could say it's a simple thing, but all of them, they say to be a great marketer, the one thing that you should one skill that you should possess is the ability just to be curious about not only the brands or the companies that you or the
Mhm.
industry you're working in, but just holistically as a human being, you need to be asking why and sometimes get yourself in a rabbit hole just digging deep and learning stuff
Mm.
because that's where you draw inspiration from.
I love that you raised and answered my question with kind of saying that key question that you've asked your guest and what that common thread was as an answer from your guest and it being curiosity. And I think to be open-minded, to look at things from different perspectives and know what's happening, globally, regionally, locally, it does take that level of curiosity and of asking the right questions, right? And that really makes great marketers because they ask the right questions, they stay open-minded, they look at things from different perspectives. And that's how you also tap into some of those consumer insights that you need to be able to connect with your audiences. What I'd love to ask you is we know we always in this podcast and we always have guests and we're talking about the power of out of home as a medium in brand building, building brand salience, building brand equity. It is such a great medium for that. We just had a conversation with Kantar, Sayesh from Kantar talking about, the benefits of out of home within the media mix. And one of the things being, this brand building. But I'd like to chat to you about it. Have you had, these conversations with your guests or perhaps in your own agency where you look at the medium out of home and how do you evaluate the medium as out of home and how do you look at incorporating it to build brands? And what are your thoughts on this particular topic on hand?
Yeah. I mean, interesting question you ask, and I think I want to sort of share my experience because in as
Please.
much I own a digital platform and all sort of our initiatives are usually digitally led, right? So when I
Mm.
started the top 16 youth-owned brands awards, obviously the idea was to push it all social media, digital platforms, our websites, email, and everything like that. And obviously, when I was still starting out, people were sort of doubtful, to say, but yeah, what is this thing? We see it, but we don't see it. But what shifted, many people's perception was when we started, placing our ads on the billboards throughout Johannesburg and other parts of the country. And you take that piece of content that, the picture of your thing on a billboard and you put it on social media. All of a sudden now people are like, this thing is real. This thing is happening, and that's what I think out of home, or the power of out of home is that when you're starting out and you are not known, it somewhat gives you your brand credibility. And I think that's the one thing that I can say about out of home, that it has given us so much credibility, even also for some of our winners, that also get put up on those billboards. They come back to us to say, oh, I never thought one day my brand will be on a billboard. So it's a big deal, for them to be on such I know out of home is broad, it includes like your mall advertising, but I want to speak specifically about billboards, that people when they see their brands, they see themselves, all of a sudden it almost like validates their existence, as entrepreneurs to say, actually, I'm onto something here, and I've got my brand being seen by thousands and thousands of people, which is, I think, in my view, incredible.
I think the example you've given is such a practical example of, your awards that take place. It's not a long brand building story that's necessarily happening. You're wanting to promote the awards that's happening at the time, as well as doing something new for the first time. How are you going to make sure everybody knows about it? So I love how you've painted the picture of how you've gone the digital route and the social route, which I think is a lot of brands when they're starting out with something new or testing media for the first time. It's the perfect place to start, but elevating it by adding in that out of home. I think the example you've given is such a practical one that I think can really give our audience an idea of you don't have to be the Coca-Colas of the world or the biggest brands in the world to actually be using out of home effectively and seeing those results. I love that you guys use digital out of home to communicate around the awards, and then you also had the winners be placed on the artwork. I think it's really important that, like you say, these young entrepreneurs they're seeing their brand in lights for the first time. And what does that feel like? I think the fame effect, as well as the trust and credibility that comes from using out of home as a platform. We had Calvin Collett, the CEO and founder of Melon Mobile, join us, and we spoke a lot about trust, that you can build trust for a new brand using out of home. And I think that it shows the industry that this is a brand to be taken seriously if they've invested in media. And in the out of home media specifically. So I think it's a great example. I would also love to touch on the youth market. You've spoken quite a lot about the youth. You obviously have started these awards which focus on the youth market, specifically around youth-owned brands. It speaks to this entrepreneurial spirit that you come from. So I would love to hear from you, looking at media with this lens of, the youth brands for the awards that you host, as well as how do entrepreneurs enter the market. You spoke about something that stayed with you from your guests is really how do you get started? Again, that speaks to the youth market. Both Kirsty and I have been involved in mentorship in our agency careers as well as outside of those careers. So we've seen the importance of mentorship and guidance and focusing on the youth market. But I wonder if we could just take a pause for a moment to speak around the youth awards that you do, and you could tell us a little bit about what it's all about.
Yeah. So I started the Youth Owned Brands Awards. Actually, they are turning Fashion Brands is turning 10 this year, and this year will be the fifth installment of the awards. And oftentimes when you talk about the youth, and if you look at mainstream media, it's often in a negative lens. The youth is unemployed, apathetic, entitled. They show up at workplaces and all of that. And I wanted to challenge that narrative to say, in as much as, yes, we have a high youth unemployment in this country, but there are young people out there that are doing incredible things, that are starting, businesses, that are creating employment opportunities for other young people, not only for themselves. Today, when a young person leaves university, there's hardly any promise of them getting an opportunity to get into the job market. So the only way we can solve this high unemployment challenge that we're facing is that if we get more young people starting businesses so that they can employ. So that's really, at the core of the Yobas, as now we call them, is that to tell that unique story, of an African youth, the one that says these are people that are taking initiative, that are starting businesses.
Pat, I think that you've touched on something really interesting. I think that from a media principle perspective, so often brands often want to know, how do we engage with them, right? How do we engage with the youth market, with the next up and coming level? A lot of the banking brands want to look at how do we speak to these young entrepreneurs so that they can use our products. And I wonder if there is something in what you've shared now around a creative idea around how brands can actually tap into youth markets is through supporting their brands and their platforms and what matters to them, not just aligning with them on what their interests might be. So, the youth market are interested in music and fashion and sports. So let's create a campaign that connects with them around those interests. That's one part of a marketing campaign. Another part of it is really around how do you actually get entrenched in that person's life? How do you change their business? How do you help them take their business to the next level? There's a link about connecting with youth youth market that goes beyond, as I said, tapping into, most of them might play paddle and that might be interesting. So let's therefore ensure we are speaking to them in those environments. It's more around how do we connect with their stories? What actually matters to them are not just their interests, it's about how do they grow their businesses. So I think that's a really interesting kind of piece that you've left us with. Instead of thinking, as you said, you launched the awards because there was this at times negative sentiment about what is happening with the youth market in the country. So I really love that you've done that. I think it's also a story of hope, whether you're starting out in media or starting out as a business owner. At some point, you need to find a place for inspiration and support. And I think what you're doing around supporting the youth is absolutely fantastic.
I'm gonna double click on what you just said in terms of how do big brands or big corporates then partner up with or attract the youth market. The best campaign is the one that I can see myself in it. So a lot of even something as basic as the spokesperson for that particular initiative, they don't see themselves in that person. They talk at young people. They don't engage. Young people want to see themselves. They want to see some. The reason why I'm able to, or we are able to garner so much support, because there's many young people that see themselves in me, in my journey. They know my story. They know where I come from, where I grew up, and I don't. I speak the language that they speak. They can relate.
I think it's so critical what you've raised is to kind of talk with them in conversation with the youth or within the generations that you're looking to target versus talking at them. And I think another big piece here is to co-curate with your audience, right? So you're not just creating for them or at them, it's to co-curate with them. And that's where you're building connections as a brand with your target audience or with your desired audience, is when you are in conversation with them, or you're co-curating with them, where you're bringing them into the fold and into the conversation and understanding, like you say, understanding this audience. And I think this is where you get these strong connections, a strong engagement that brands are often looking for. So I think it's amazing that you've raised that. What I would like to just say is, obviously, we will tag Pat on Brands if anybody is interested, any of the brands, clients, media owners, agencies out there that are interested to have further conversations with Pat with regards to this incredible awards and sponsors that they're looking for now or in the future, or to have a more exploratory conversations. We will tag Pat on Brands so that you can have these conversations about how you can support. They're doing absolutely incredible work.
The Mall, the heart of any community in South Africa. A destination no longer dedicated to shopping, but a place where friends and families go for an experience. This is the rhythm of retail. What if we could put your brand in front of them? With Africa's largest digital mall network at your disposal, you can reach millions of SA's most powerful shoppers when it matters most. Reach them with Mall TV.
I do want to call out, I think I did see a post from Kyalicha Cookies that's now got an agreement with British Airways, which I think that's phenomenal.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting with Kylie Cookies, because we also, through one of our other clients, we engage with them, and the story is just amazing, and to see them now even partnering up with much bigger global brand, it's just just a beautiful story, because I mean, here's a brand started, in Kylie and really wanting to, alleviate people out of poverty, and now, being enjoyed, 3,000 feet above sea level. I think it's absolutely incredible. And those are the stories that also we highlight, and we are very deliberate about as a platform. No one is paying attention to the emerging brands and the brands that are, on the come up. And that's what we are intentional about, as Patron Brands, as well as obviously the Yobas, to really, highlight the stories of those brands.
Mm. Thank you. And I'm so glad we had the conversation around this initiative and how powerful it is. And I love hearing these stories. And I think it's incredible the work you're doing. But I want to just circle back to the point you made on focusing back on the lens of out of home and just shifting gears here is when you spoke about how out of home gives brands credibility, right? And you were saying, the moment you go into out of home, it's underscoring the brand. It's giving the brand the sense of credibility. It's like, if I see the brand on a billboard, they must be real. It has it's known through research and data to be a trust building medium as out of home. So it does give that sense of, of building credibility. But I would love to hear from you as someone who's been quite involved in marketing and marketing conversations and you're brand obsessed and focusing on brands, is what would you say perhaps is your best or your most impactful or inspiring out-of-home campaign that you have either seen or your agency's been a part of, or, one of the youth brands has done themselves or something like that that you would like to share, that you just sat back and you were like, wow, this is an incredible use of advertising. This is an incredible use of the out-of-home medium.
Yeah, I don't know to sound biased, but there's a couple. I mean, there's a lot. I think we've got some amazing brands that are doing incredible things out of home space, and I think if you say young, fresh brand, I think Pineapple has done incredibly well. When they, through out of home, they've came up with some really interesting campaigns that not only stayed offline but also dominated our LinkedIn timelines. Every now and then you see people posting about that brand is doing. Then I think we had another one, and it's unfortunate that the brand is somewhat no more, but Drip, was another brand that I remember that that did really well, in the out of home space, and again, really also solidified its presence through out of home. If you're in Joburg and you drive, is it William Nicol? There's a Netflix on the bridge. There's one static billboard there, and they keep on changing the copy. It's a simple billboard you'll ever see, but the copy is usually quirky and interesting. And just, after a long day in Sandton driving home, and you just have a good laugh reading it. So that's the good use.
It's always on point. Those messages, I just want to build on that. Like, they tap into the trend, right? And then they tap into the trend of what's conversational at the time. And I'm sure they're looking at, who's, consuming the more of their content or what's trending, but they always seem to have on that board, like, tapped into a trend or a conversational point or something that's happening on social. And then they pull it up on that board. And I think that's what I absolutely love, is that they're kind of using what's the ability of digital out of home, which is the flexibility, the adaptability, and changing it, but actually on a static site. I think that's really clever. I'm glad you raised that.
Yeah, that site is absolutely fantastic. It's an outdoor network site. And what I wanted to add is that for the launch of Bridgerton, they did the most fantastic activation using that site and setting up, actually, people were playing music. They were playing musical instruments from that site. So they created like a stand in front of it. And it was linked so beautifully with the activation and the use of the site. So they're using the site, as you mentioned, for Workers' Day to be like relevant, as well as a combination of activations and the site combined together. So it's a fantastic site that Netflix have put out. Almost in every market, they have these marquee sites that they're using in that same way. So it's great to see that also happening in South Africa, as well as replicating what they've got in some of the global markets. I think it's a great place for us to finish the episode up there. Thank you so much for sharing with us today. Thanks for chatting to us around the amazing awards that you're doing, as well as some of the fantastic insights from the guests that you've had on your platform. And congratulations on being in the industry for 10 years with Pat's on Brands and 5 years with your awards. I think that you're really a great example. We spoke about the youth market, and I think that you're a perfect role model in that space. And thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing with us.
Thank you so much for having me. And we are still on the hunt for sponsorship for the Yoba. So if anyone there is watching, please do reach out to us.
Thank you to the sponsor of today's episode. Your support helps make Beyond the Billboard possible and helps us to bring you the first and only out-of-home podcast in South Africa.
Thanks for joining us today to go beyond the billboard. Subscribe to our podcast to ensure you don't miss out on our exciting content.
Join us again to go beyond the billboard.
1, 2,